by answering who I am. Uh, I'm Liam. I'm right now a second year law student at the University of Ottawa. I'll explain a bit about my career or my path into law school. Uh, I undergraduated from undergrad in medical sciences and English. I initially wanted to go into medical school. I even wrote the MCAT. What changed is that I actually did decently well on the MCAT, but I realized my heart wasn't in it. And I think right when I graduated, decided I wanted to try law school instead. So I wrote the LSAT. I did okay. I didn't do amazing, and I kept going. And I applied, and I ended up getting in at the University of Ottawa. Right now, I want to go into criminal law. I guess a fun fact is I'm on the debate team uh, uh, right now during law school. I won a tournament. That was pretty fun. Um, During this summer, I'm working at OneHub Growth as their community information officer. About OneHub Growth, OneHub Growth is a volunteer-based, not-for-profit organization located in Markham. We support we support, connect, and advocate for equity-driven groups to unlock their full potential through community engagement. We believe that their diverse perspectives and lived experiences bring important contributions to our communities. Now, I am not alone. I have a co-commentator. Gagan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gagan. Similar to Liam's, I graduated undergrad at York University. So, I did my undergrad in criminology. From there, I was able to get accepted into Osgood. Did the LSAT a couple of times. It was probably the hardest test I ever did in my life, to be honest with you guys. But, it is what it is. After Osgood, I graduated in 2022. And then after graduating, I was fortunate enough to work at one of the corporate law firms downtown, Blake's. So I was there for a year and a half, but at the back of my mind, I always had this idea of opening up my own firm and kind of having my own practice. It's kind of leap of faith to take, obviously. Like a downtown Bay Street job is a very secure job, and a solo is it's a very difficult thing to do. And then opportunity kind of came up while I was working at Blake's, and I was able to transition into a kind of I would say hybrid practice solo practitioner job where I work with another individual, but we kind of grow our businesses together. Where I bring in clients, he brings in clients, and we kind of just work together at this firm. It's been a great thing for me so far. I think just the fact that going as a solo, you see like the business development aspect of being a lawyer, which is something you don't really learn in law school. It's kind of something you pick up, and it's something that I'm still picking up and kind of trying to understand and get better at. Fun fact about me: outside of law school, I do play flag football. It's something that I really enjoy. I'm in a league right now when we're kind of playing right now for the summer, so that's something I enjoy. I also really enjoy watching and playing basketball as well.
Nice, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Gagan.
Yeah.
Um, so this will be, I guess, integrated interview. So I'll be presenting, I guess, tips for going into law school, and doing well as a lawyer or becoming a lawyer, and then I'll be asking Gagan questions throughout the interview. Now, before we begin, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. We begin today by acknowledging the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples and their commitments to the stewardship of the land. We acknowledge the communities and circles, the north, west, south, and eastern directions, the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Seneca, Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit peoples. We share the responsibility with the caretakers of this land to ensure the dish is never empty and to restore relationships that are based on peace, friendship, and trust. We're committed to reconciliation, partnership, and enhanced understanding. Now, I want to start this off by addressing the popular culture idea of being a lawyer. I bet a lot of people, I think maybe not the people in this room, but I know from personal experience, a lot of the people who want to go to law school often are inspired in some parts, probably by Suits. I think Suits is the most common image of a lawyer people have, particularly, I think, Harvey Specter. And I think we can talk about how accurate that image is. But first, I think let's talk about the actual career, the actual official career description of being a lawyer. This is from the National Occupation Classification, which is Canada's kind of job code. It's essentially the career description of being a lawyer and a Quebec notary. Essentially, they advise clients on legal matters, represent clients before administration boards, and draw up legal documents such as contracts and wills. They also plead cases, represent clients before tribunals, and conduct prosecutions in courts of law. Lawyers are employed in both law firms and Quebec or in prosecutors' offices. Quebec notaries are employed in notary offices, and both of them are employed by federal, provincial, and municipal government. If you're confused by what a Quebec notary is, long story short is that Quebec has a unique civil law system that's separate from the rest of Canada's, and so the oh, someone had training room, and so the essentially Quebec notaries are a function of that, but it's not terribly important. The general duties of a lawyer are roughly, as mentioned in the description, consulting clients with regards to their legal rights and obligations, gathering evidence, citing legislation, and researching cases or jurisprudential precedents, which help them in court, or like either in lawsuits or just in general when they're advising clients of what the actual law is in legal issues. I think at this point it's probably best to ask the actual lawyer here. So, Gagan, I guess what's your average day-to-day life like as a lawyer, or what's your average like? What are the average duties you would kind of have to do?
Yeah, so I think for me, as someone that's practicing as a solo practitioner or a smaller firm, kind of our day to day looks like, we do a lot of admin job that is kind of not put in as the duties of lawyers. So there's obviously requirements from the law society for us to do things like get IDs from clients, right? Set up interviews with them. So that's the thing that I usually do is first thing I do is I get IDs from clients. I'll set up an initial meeting. And then we'll go over the matter at hand. My practice revolves around corporate law, real estate, and wills and estate planning. So we'll set up an initial meeting. I'll have a one-on-one conversation with the client to try to understand the matter. If there's research that needs to be done in terms of legislation or things of that nature, I will conduct that research and then get back to the client. I may have another second meeting with that client where we kind of discuss the matter a little bit further. It's very specific to the practice area that you practice in. So I do a lot of solicitor work, which is documentation based. I have friends that are in the kind of litigation based practice where their system is more adversarial, where your lawyers are basically fighting against each other or on behalf of their clients. So I think it's different based on what type of practice area you want to do, So I'm the type of lawyer that I'm not in court much. You probably very rare for me to be in court, whereas a litigation-based lawyer is probably in court every day, right? And their days look very different than mine, right? They're doing things like they're going motions, they're preparing documentation, and then they're going to actual court, right? Whether it be via Zoom or whether it be in the office, right? My kind of day to day is a little bit different. I'm doing a lot of business development. I'm reaching out to referral sources, people that can give me work. And then once that referral source is there and a client comes in, I'll have initial meetings with them. And depending on the practice area, I'll open up a file, kind of conduct research, and then we can draft documents. And then whether execution is needed or not will be dependent on the type of document that is required.
That's actually that's a very good answer, and actually a nice segue into I kind of actually I was going to ask you about that a bit later, but specifically the types of careers. I'll come back to the job prospects part because I think we had an interesting talk about that. You mentioned that you're a corporate lawyer, and I know you do estates and real estate. I want to stress that there's to the people watching that there's a lot of different types of law. Gagan, specifically, what you mentioned that a lot of it is different and based on the types of law you're into. For
Mhm.
corporate law, like what is that specific, or how would you describe that specifically, or the difference between corporate and states law and other types of law?
So even like corporate law can be divided into like subgroups, right? So there's corporate law that I was doing on Bay Street where you're representing multinational companies, there's share purchases, there are IPOs happening where a company goes and they want to be listed on the Toronto stock market, and you got to prepare documentation, right? There's all this legislation in terms of what you have to disclose, right? Any liabilities the corporation has, any shares, how much they're worth, right? So you can think of that as like the big Bay Street corporate law. Whereas as a solo now, the corporate law is a little bit different, right? I'm mostly representing smaller to mid-sized businesses. So you have your doctors, engineers want to create a corporation. and have tax savings. So I will be the lawyer that prepares the corporation for them. I'll prepare the articles of incorporation. I'll prepare the minute books. If there's multiple stakeholders involved, I'll prepare a shareholders agreement, which outlines each individual's rights as a shareholder of the corporation. There's other things that we also do, directors resolutions, anything needs to be passed and the corporation, needs to make a decision. A resolution has to be passed that says that everyone here kind of agrees to this, and this is the thing that the corporation is going to do. So that's how like corporate law differs, like just between like a big Bay Street job and like a solo or like a smaller firm. And then there's also obviously difference between like corporate, criminal, and states law, right? So I do a states law as well. It's completely different from corporate. With the states, you're dealing with people preparing their wills, doing things like family trust, like estate freezes. So that's a more so, where you're just it's a one-on-one with the client, right? You ask the client what type of assets they have, who they want to distribute it to, who's going to be the estate trustee, kind of things like that. So that's how corporate and estates law kind of differs. And then real estate, obviously, you're doing selling homes or commercial real estate. There's realtors involved in that type of law. And then there's a lot of back and forth, right? Negotiation of prices. You don't do things like title searches, ensure that there's no like mortgages on the property. If any mortgage is on the property before it's sold, it has to be erased, right? So that's how it differs. Like just depending on what type of law you're interested in, it's very different, I would say. And then you also have litigation, which is completely different from the other two types of law that I mentioned, right? Where you're actually taking on a client's position and going to court and fighting on their behalf, right? So these types of laws that I've kind of mentioned, the corporate, the estate, the real estate, you're not in court much as you would be as a litigation lawyer. As a litigation lawyer, you're probably 24/7 in court, and here it's very rare for you to go to court. So I would say it differs basically based on what type of practice area you want to do. And then it just, I think it comes down to your strengths and weaknesses, right? So there's a lot of people out there, they like to be on their feet, they like to be thinking, and they like to be presenting, right? So they're more toned to being like litigation lawyers, which includes criminal, right? Because criminal, you're also in front of a judge. Employment, it can also be seen as like a litigation based position because you're fighting on behalf of employees or employers. And then there's other people that they enjoy the presenting stuff, but they need some time, right? They're better at researching, or like you give them a document or piece of legislation, they want to take some time, think about it, have some critical thinking processes into it, and then present it to a client. So I think those people are more inclined to explore areas like corporate, estate planning, and things of that nature.
Thanks. That was a really detailed answer. Um, I guess just a couple more questions just to kind of jump off this, and then we can move on. The first is, I guess, as per Suits, what would you, how realistic would you say popular depictions of being a lawyer actually are?
I would say it's not very a real like depiction of what an actual lawyer does. So in shows like Suits, right, you see Steve Harvey, he already knows what to do, and he already has everything laid out, and he just kind of going and doing negotiations with the other side. So I think that is a part of being a lawyer, the part where you go and negotiate and you're in big boardrooms and there's the other side that comes. But that's a very small portion of it, I would say. I would say the ground up, right? The things like doing the research, preparing the documentation, speaking with other colleagues, trying to get someone else's opinion involved. Like all that is also part of the process. But I think Suits kind of only shows the sexy part of, the big negotiations and then the claims that you get, right? And in reality, even those types of claims, they take years. It's not a thing where someone comes in a week later, you're kind of done and, the case is over with, right? It's like, for example, litigation is a practice area where most cases, can take up to 3 to 4 years, right? So you might have, your statement of claim where you lay out what the issues are, right? And then you may have discoveries a year later. 2 years later, you may have a settlement conference. And then 3 years later, if it's still not settled, you may have a trial, like a full-blown trial, right? Whereas Suits kind of depicts it as, a case comes in next week's trial, or, a corporate deal comes in and they're closing within a week or so. So I think there's some parts of it that, are correct, I would say, in terms of the negotiations, and being in boardrooms, like things of that nature. But I think it pulls out like the sexy parts that of being a lawyer, and it kind of hides the legwork that you have to do in order to be that and present that.
Yeah. No, I think I was watching I saw an episode of Grey's Anatomy that had uh court episode, and there's like the lawyer said like, all right, your trial's tomorrow, right after like they got sued. And I was like, that's crazy. I know that doesn't happen. That takes like ages. Uh I think it does like take like years, I believe.
Yeah,
Um
so like in litigation, a matter has to be settled set for trial within 5 years. So it can't go more than 5 years, but still, like the process is like you serve someone, they serve you back, and then there's motions, and then there's a settlement conference. There's discoveries where you have to go in and you can like interview the person that's there that was involved, right? Like for example, someone is injured, right, and they're being sued. You want to ask that person, hey, when you were like driving your car, what color was the light, right? So you do all that stuff and then gather evidence and then you kind of make your claim, right? So it's not a week thing or a couple days thing. Especially for litigation, it takes a couple years for anything to be settled.
yeah. I also you mentioned specifically that you're not in-house, or well, you're not in-house, or you mentioned that you work alongside a solo practitioner.
Yeah.
Um, can you explain the kind of difference between that? Because I think that's kind of enlightening.
Yeah, so an in-house job is a little bit different than being a solo practitioner. So in-house position is basically a company hires you, and you become their full-time lawyer. So anything that they need help with, let's say it's Amazon or Rogers or Bell, because they have a lot of, in-house lawyers. Any type of issues that comes out related to law, they'll come to you and be like, hey, we have this. How do we go about, right? So it's more so of a generalist position where you need to have knowledge of multiple layers of law. So there might be, a GC that takes care of, or in-house counsel that takes care of litigation claims, right? And within litigation, you may be dealing with employment, labor, and then also other claims where someone sues the company, right? And then they might have another person that does the kind of corporate work, right? Reviewing contracts, things of that nature. So in-house is good in the sense that you're not actively looking for business. Basically the company is giving you business. There's no kind of business development. You just serve the corporation that you're working under, and that's about it. A solo or like working at a small firm or something like I do is a little bit different because I don't have one client. I have thousands of clients, right? And a huge part of what I do, or a huge aspect of it, is business development, right? I have to actively be looking for clients, trying to get people to provide service to them. It's not like I just walk in and there's a bunch of work for me to do, right? So I think in-house and solo is different in that aspect, where in-house you're not really concerned with business development. You're more concerned with just getting the work done and serving one client. Whereas a solo, you're serving a multitude of clients, and business development also becomes an important part of it, right? And then there's also differences in salaries, right? So as an in-house, you're capped at a certain point, right? You can only make so much, right? And you're still considered an employee at the end of the day. Whereas a solo, you kind of run the show, right? There's no kind of, I would say, cap on how much money you can make. It's really dependent on you. You know how much work you want to do, how many clients you want to do, how many networking kind of processes you want to go through. So I think those are the huge differences. And then obviously being like an associate working at like a base rate firm is completely different than both of those, because those are, I would say it's similar to in-house in the sense that you're not doing like business development per se, but the hours you're working are very, very long. You're working upwards of 80 to 90 hours. Like I remember there's days I'll be working from 7 a.m. to 1 a.m., right? So um, like you get the high salaries and stuff, but you're also kind of working very long hours, and that's expected. Whereas in-house, it's usually your 40-hour weeks. It's kind of laid back. You get your benefits and everything. So I think there's pros and cons to all three types. So there's the big corporate law firm, big salary, but you're working like crazy hours, right? And then in-house, you make a good chunk of money, but you're not doing business development. You're working your 35, 40 hours and you're capped at a certain amount. And then the solo is probably like the riskiest thing you can do because there's no guarantee of how much you'll make, but the upside is very high, right? There's no cap on how much you can make, and it's really dependent on what you want to do, right? So I would say those are kind of the three broad categories of positions that you can kind of pursue. And then there's also government lawyers as well. I would say they're more similar to in-house counsel because you're just representing the government, so it would be similar to that.
Mhm. And I think we've talked about this, but you like solo a lot, or you really enjoy being a solo practitioner as well for that, right?
Yeah, so I think for myself, like I got to experience like most of it. I wasn't in-house counsel ever, but I got to experience the big Bay Street position, I was an associate and then also like a solo as well. So I think I enjoy being the solo the most, just because of the business development aspect of it. Because as an associate or working at a big firm, you're not doing any of that. You're just kind of working your way off, and that's it. As a solo, I can control my schedule in a sense, right? So there's days where I'll just go out, network with people 3, 4 hours, not do too much law like legal work. And there's other days where I'm doing a lot of legal work and not a lot of networking, right? So I think it gives me a good balance of things to do. It's not just working and that's it. And I enjoy going out, meeting people. You learn a lot from other people as well. So I think that kind of it keeps it keeps it different. I think as being an associate, it's kind of the same things over and over again. I think eventually you get to a point where you've kind of seen everything. Obviously, there's new things that will happen, but you've seen like 90% of everything, and it's kind of just rinse and repeat. Whereas what I kind of do is I focus on networking a lot, which is you're always meeting new people, always people with new ideas. So I really enjoy that aspect of it, and also having like full control of my schedule, right? Like it's not like I gotta start at 9 o'clock and stop at 5. I can start at 11 and at 6. There might be days where I start like 12 and at 7. So it's completely I have full control over my schedule. I think that's kind of the most important part for myself.
No, that makes a ton of sense. Thanks so much. And then I think specifically on to the as well as the type of careers. I think there's also this is a graphic from Canada's Job Bank. Again, like official career statistics. This is supposed to be about the career prospects for being a lawyer. So see, in most provinces, it says it's generally moderate. So you'll get some decent employment growth, but nothing spectacular. Uh, I guess it's a nice segue for me to ask you again, Gagan, about your experience with the job market here. Would you say there's moderate employment uh, or moderate
Yeah,
employment?
Yeah, I would say there's moderate employment. I think a lot of people have that idea of working downtown at the big Bay Street firms, and they consider that as like being a successful lawyer. So chances of being in that position is not as high as this kind of document shows, because there's only a very small proportion of people that actually work at those jobs. I would say less than 5% or 10% are lawyers that are working on big Bay Street, positions. A lot of them are working as solos like myself, or working as smaller firms or mid-sized firms, or the government, or so there's kind of a broad spectrum. I would say the thing that what humbled me in the beginning was, as a lawyer that has freshly graduated, and you have no experience as being a lawyer, you just kind of graduated law school. It's a little bit difficult to find a job in the beginning because a lot of people expect you to have experience. And when you're kind of, in that mindset, I think when you just graduated, you have your license, you think you can pick and choose where you work, which is not the case, right? Because a lot of people, or a lot of people in the industry, are not looking to train new lawyers, right? It just depends on the type of culture you're in, right? So I think as you get more experience, those opportunities obviously grow, right? Like being someone like myself, now I have a couple years of experience under my belt. I'll have recruiters reach out to me on LinkedIn, saying, "Hey, this is a possible position. We think you may be interested." Whereas when I had initially graduated law school, I was reaching out to these recruiters, and they were all saying, "Hey, we don't really want you right now because you don't have experience," right? So I think the hardest part is the initial first 2 years after graduating, and then after that, it gets a little bit better, the job prospects as well.
That makes sense. I think this is on salary, not employment statistics, but it does go up with the years since someone's been called to the bar. So if you've been practicing for like even just 1 year, the average salary for a lawyer in Canada is 110K, and then it goes up substantially the longer you've been practicing, which I was pleasantly surprised by. I feel like a lot of people are a bit pessimistic about careers in law. I think specifically there's an idea on motive what the question I think it might be worth asking on why should you become a lawyer? Uh and the basic gist of this is that there's no wrong answer. Some people say that you should know in your gut you really, really want to be a lawyer. And I think this is partially true because there is a large and like law school, we'll talk about this later, but things like law school is a large both time investment and financial investment. And Gagan already mentioned how much the actual hours of being a lawyer can eat away at you. So it's if you only tangentially want to be a lawyer, it may be worth evaluating. Uh, it can be a very hard road, so it may not be worth it if you only just kind of want to be a lawyer. Do you have any thoughts, or why do you want to be a lawyer, Gagan?
Honestly, for myself, so I had done my undergrad in criminology. I didn't think it had the best career prospects, to be honest with you, because it was a very like theoretical degree, I would say. So, like right when I got into my criminology program, I was already looking at what the next step would be for me, right? So I was looking at things like grad school or kind of, a master's degree. Nothing really stood out to me, to be honest. I always had in the back of my mind, hey, maybe I'll try this lawyer stuff. Seems interesting. I was also like a lot of people watching the shows and things of that nature. Didn't really know if I could do it, to be honest. So I was like, let me just see how my first 2 years go, and then we'll kind of take it from there. So I did my first 2 years in undergrad, and my grades were pretty decent. So I was like, hey, I may have a chance at this. And then I got hit with the LSAT. So I knew going in that the LSAT was a very difficult test. A lot of people had told me. I had never done like a logical reasoning course. A lot of people say that if you do that, it helps with the LSAT and stuff of that nature. I was too concerned about my grades, so I wasn't really looking into doing that. I was just trying to get the best grades as I can. And then I would say my like second year of undergrad, I was like, okay, this is getting serious now. Like I need to really lock in and get this LSAT over with, right? Or try to figure out how I can do it. So the summer of my second year, I started studying for it. I bought like the book, started studying, doing self-studying. It went terribly, to be honest with you guys. At that point, I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do. I wasn't really kind of understanding the test or how it processed or, kind of getting a higher score in it. So the year after, at my third year, I actually got like a course I wanted to do. So I was enrolled in an LSAT course. And that was probably like the best investment I could make because I saw like substantial results from having someone teach me the course rather than self-studying. And then ultimately, because of that course, was able to get a high enough score to actually apply and get into law school. And then yeah, was able to graduate and kind of go from there. So I would say like obviously I think the financial gain is substantial if you're able to do it. You're in a secure position. It's a respectable career. So I would say those are kind of the driving force behind my decision and why I wanted to kind of pursue it.
Yeah. I think I majored in English, so it wasn't really it's not really known for being an employable major. I'll put it like that. Uh, this is basically going to be the, I guess this is somewhat of a table of contents, but it also covers the rough timeline you want to go as assuming you go straight from undergrad to law school to articling to becoming a lawyer. Not everyone does this all right away, especially if you're a mature student. Your timeline may look a lot different, but this is like the I guess the technically shortest timeline. And this will cover kind of a lot of what else the presentation is going to talk about, which is actually getting to the part of being a lawyer. So getting to the part that Gagan's already talked about. So specifically, we'll talk about we'll touch on your undergrad in the LSAT. I think Gagan's already done a really good job with this. And then we'll talk a bit more about your law school, articling, and then the bar exam. So especially the criminology stuff, in this section is probably going to assume, although I'm not sure how many of you are actually in high school, but this is probably going to talk about the most useful if you're in high school or university. Although if you're a mature student or you've already finished, it's okay. The point of this section is that your undergraduate degree does not matter. If you're wondering about what your major you should go into, it doesn't matter. I think the general answer to this question is you want something that you will allow you to get good grades, so you can have time to either beef up your resume or as in get a good extracurriculars, or just have more time so you could study and get even better grades. Because getting into law school can be pretty difficult. Um, if you're wondering if your major is going to help you in law school and you're thinking about writing something with like a lot of papers, um, or like going into criminology, again, in criminology help you in law school very much?
Yeah, so I would say not really. Like a lot of people that I went to criminology with, like some of them did end up being criminal lawyers per se. But like my degree was more focused on like why people commit crime and like the theory of it, right? Whereas like being like a criminal lawyer, you don't really care about any of that. You're more so just kind of concerned with representing your client and ensuring that they don't go to jail at the end of the day. So I would say, yeah, like kind of agree with what you're saying. Like most of the undergrad degrees, they don't really help you be a good lawyer. I think most of the learning is done in law school and actually practice. Even law school, I would say, is more so like theory based, whereas like the actual practice is where you learn how to be a lawyer. So I would say, like just like you said, just try to choose a degree that is somewhat easy and you can get high grades and you have interest in it. And then you should be good. You shouldn't try to like pigeonhole yourself. Oh, this major is the only way that I can get to law school. It's going to help me out. I don't think that's the case. I think any kind of major can do it, but it just you just gotta maintain a high GPA because it is very competitive to get in, right? I think most of the law schools are, they expect like a 3.6, 3.7 GPA, which is pretty hard to maintain, right, throughout undergrad.
Yeah, I think it's and I've got actually researched admission the actual admission rates for law schools, and I'll get to that later, but it's a lot lower than I thought actually. It's pretty hard. And so the point blank or the bottom line is that if you're in high school or if you're in undergrad right now, it doesn't major in something easy and get the best grades you can. Like really, it's like don't do like when I was in med school or wanted to go to med school, I did medical sciences, and that was a horrible idea because med sci is a really hard degree, and I got okay grades, but I had to spend a ton of time actually getting them. Like, don't be like me. Get something easy, do something easy, get high grades, like, and beef up your resume. I think now let's move on to the LSAT, and I think this is where kind of Gagan. I think your previous experience was really helpful hit there. So I'll let see if people can use that hand raise function. But how many of you guys have actually like how much like can you raise your hand if you know a lot about the LSAT already? Like there's a hand raise function on Zoom. I'm don't see any hands raised, so I'm gonna guess that's a no. So I can go a bit so we can go a bit more in depth. So this is like, especially if you're a mature student, this is where I think you should listen. Because often, if you did not know go into law school or go into undergrad knowing you wanted to do something like law school, you may not have very good grades. And so you need to do very well in the LSAT to make up for that. Roughly, there's four sections, or really there's like three, but yeah, there's a logical reasoning. I think Gagan's mentioned this, where roughly you're given a small passage or a small paragraph, and you are asked questions about the argument within that paragraph. Um, there's two of these in the test. They're 35 minutes each. Then there's a reading comprehension section, which is 1 minute and or one. Sorry, it's only there's only one section of this, and it gives you like one very large passage or like 5 or 6 questions, and you have to like answer it. And there's five small questions asking you about the arguments within each passage. So maybe it'll be about what a certain paragraph was doing in the argument, or what the thesis of the overall claim was, or the overall conclusion. I took the LSAT recently, so I could or retook it just to brush up on this, and it's a bit of an interesting trip. So it was a bit interesting to redo it again. Overall, it's actually not comparatively that long, which is part of the problem. I think it's only 35 minutes for each section for a total of 2 hours and 20 minutes, or is 2 hour, yeah, 2 hours and 20 minutes. And this seems short, and that's bad because time management is really hard. They ask you a lot of questions in a very short amount of time, and this is going to be the brunt of if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, from my personal experience, it's that if you want to do on the LSAT, you should work on time management and answering as much questions as possible in a short amount of time because it's really hard. That's the biggest skill, I think. The rough gist with the LSAT questions are, as I mentioned, this is, I guess, somewhat practical from when I like recently just redid it, but it's usually about picking the most correct answer. Most questions are going to have answers that can be right, and you'll have to pick the most correct between them. Um, Specifically, a kind of example argument, and this is something actually a question that I was actually in the prep or a bastardized version of the question in the prep test I had was the kind of example passage that I was given. Basically, an argument saying people who are close to each other often can finish each other's sentences, which means they must be psychic, and there's no other explanation. This is going to be the one I think outside the Q&A, the one interactive portion. If the question asks you for their biggest weakness with the argument, and you're given two options. First, that there's other explanations for this phenomena that the argument doesn't address. So there's other like close friends or family don't just need psychic powers to tell what each other are thinking, and that sometimes strangers can also tell what each other's or what others are feeling. So why are psychic powers exclusive to close friends and family? Uh, Only interactive question outside of the Q&A. Does anyone have an idea which one of these two weaknesses with the argument is bigger? No one wants to answer it. I can just move on. Uh, okay. Well, the answer is it's the first one. There's other explanations for the phenomena that the argument doesn't address. So basically, the biggest issue is that it just believes that psychic powers exist in the first place. And this makes sense because the central premise behind the question, or that the argument is buying into, is that psychic powers are a thing. And then it's also saying, and they exist between close friends and family. The first question challenges the central premise of the argument, and the second one only challenges the secondary premise, which is still good. It's this is what I mean by it's correct by the fact that it can be right. It's technically a correct problem with the argument, but it's not the main problem with the argument. Yeah, I think Gagan, I think what are your biggest tips for studying with the LSAT? And I think I know we talked about starting early specifically, and how much this helped you. Like generally, what do you think that helped you the most?
Yeah, so I think for myself, like I never done like a logical reasoning, like even the consent question you brought up, right? Like I've never done that in my life before I came across the LSAT. So the first, I think the one thing that helped me is I started studying my second year of undergrad. So I kind of got my feet wet, knew that this was going to be a very tough test. I need to put more work into it and take my time with it. And then also what I did is like I initially did like a self-study, kind of saw where I was at and then kind of knew that I needed a lot of work to get to where I ultimately wanted to be. And then the year after my actually third year of undergrad is when I enrolled in the course that I took. And that course helped me a lot. I think that's the only reason that I was even able to, get to my desired score on the LSAT is because of taking that course. So I would say that starting early is probably the most important thing because I do know people that, they finish their undergrad degree and then they start studying for the LSAT, but it's like if they don't get into your first or second try, they're just like, let's just do something else, and kind of the whole, law school dream is gone at that point, right? Whereas if you're someone like me, you start during your second year, you have 2 years to kind of figure it out, and even if you want to take another year off, that gives you two or three chances at it, right? So I think having chances and not wasting time because during undergrad, obviously you have those 4 months off. Some people are working, part time, but you can still kind of study for the LSAT while you work during those 4 months off of summer vacation. So I use those for kind of my studying for the LSAT. So I think that's kind of the best thing you can do. Kind of just see where you're at, start early, and then based on that, you can kind of, because I think the biggest thing with the LSAT is the more time you spend with it, the better you're going to get with it. Like anything in life, right? The more time and experience you have with it. So for myself, just having that, experience and time spent with it was really good for me.
Yeah, I think I roughly agree. I think I had written the MCAT before, and that I think helped a lot with uh prepping the LSAT. It kind of made it a bit like second nature, or I'd already done it, so it was easier to like kind of know how to like write the LSAT. So I think that certainly holds true. I think the other thing I would really want to stress, and I have like siblings writing the LSAT right now, so I can, and I tell them this all the time, is that I think for me personally, do it. You should do like I think it's you should do as much practice tests as you can. Like yeah, as you said, like the more time you spend with it, the better. And I think specifically the biggest issue tends to be like time management. I think when I rewrote it just right before or like before the presentation, I almost all my wrong answers were in this back half of each section because it's you take less time because you start getting rushed and you stop thinking as hard. So I think time management is the biggest issue, and the best way you fix that is by doing like a practice test and practicing under like simulated conditions. And that's how I think that's the best way you actually get better at time management. As well, the more time you take is just the better. Even if you do a cold score or you do a practice test without studying, and you see what you would have scored on the real test, and that's even if you do that and your score is like really high, if you take like 4 months after getting a 170 at the start, that you can still get a 180 in four, which only benefits you. So take as much time as you can, study as early as you can, you have seven, I believe now it's you can only write the LSAT 7 times in your life. You shouldn't need to write it that much, but yeah, just like use as much time as you can. Um, I also think you've also mentioned this. There are some very good study resources that you absolutely should use. I think I when I wrote the LSAT and the MCAT, I found a lot of these or I tried really hard to find a lot of these for free. And I think that I would encourage people to do this, but I would also I think coaching can be very good. I think you mentioned and it's ultimately you mentioned it was like well coaching can be expensive. It's it's not that law school is already pretty expensive. It's only going to be a drop in the bucket. You said it raised your score by like 10 points, right?
Yeah, so I think that when I after I took the course, raised my score by 10 points, and I think the course cost like $1,000. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. But yeah, like I understand like as an undergrad student, you're not working, so to fork over like $1,000 is a lot of things, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but also considering law school, I'm in law school right now and tuition's much higher than that. If you know you eh, I think there's an option for and specifically if you have the if you're able to spend that money, I think it's a very good option. Um if that's what you need. Everyone needs different things. It's something to consider. There's other free resources you can get by with. I think if you don't need stuff like this. But if you do, or if it's something that's really helpful, just get it. It's not going to be that much money overall, or in the grand scheme of things. At this point, let's say you've done your undergrad, you've gotten hopefully good grades, and you've written the LSAT. Here are the admission rates for most of the major law schools in Canada. And the biggest thing you should notice on this graph is that, and I got this from most of the law school's actual data. A lot of prep sites say they have the law school data, and I have no idea where they got it from. But what you should notice from the site is that on any school in Ontario is the most competitive because there's a lot of people. And outside of this, there's a rough correlation between how much or between the amount of people that get let in um, and the requirements that they have for your GPA and LSAT score, which I'll get to in a second. I want to note though that this is actually quite low. Like almost every school in Ontario is like sub 10% of people getting in, which is kind of not. I did not think it was this low. Here's kind of the requirements that, or these are the median that I think Gagan was talking about, or Gagan mentioned the 3.6, and I think that's a lot of the medians, especially for UT, can be a lot higher, and specifically the LSAT scores as well. I think the point of this is these are all very high or medians. These are all very competitive. I did not have, for context, my grade I only got into law school based on my LSAT score. My grades were not very good. Uh, and even then, these are very high LSAT medians as well. So this is really something that I think, if you take anything away from this graph, it's that law school, getting into law school is it's very competitive, and you need to maximize do as well as you can, or the LSAT, your undergrad, or hopefully both. And then you apply using OUAC, its website. The final part about applications that every school has their own application process. There's not really much point telling you, giving you specifics, because they'll all ask you different questions. It's worth noting you can beef up your extracurricular or your resume with whatever you've done that's not or that any extracurriculars or maybe your career history or impressive stuff you've done. Like if you cured cancer in your undergrad, even if you have a very low GPA, you will probably get into law school. This is also worthwhile noting down. You should leverage this. If your grades are very high, for example, use whatever you can to get in. And usually individual interview questions that schools ask you can kind of help with this or can kind of give you an opportunity to use this and maybe in kind of not scam, but help beef up even if your application doesn't seem that impressive. You want to use every part of your story that can maybe help fix the weaknesses in your application. I think now let's talk about law school. I haven't asked you yet, Kagan, but what was your experience in law school like?
Yeah, so I think once I got to law school, I think the hardest year is probably your first year. And that the reason for that is it's very competitive your first year because everyone is trying to get on Bay Street or the big firms. And the firms, the only thing they look at is grades, right? So it's all on grades. And law school is a little bit different than undergrad, whereas law school, you're marked on a curve, right? So what they do is, let's say there's 100 people in your class, they'll rank everyone from 1 to 100, and then the first 15 people will get A's, the next 30 people will get B's, the next 30 people will get C's, and the last like 20 people will get D's, right? So that's the way that it works. So technically, you can have like an 80%, let's say, but if everyone else got like 95s on the exam, you could still end up with a C, right? Whereas like undergrad, if it's like you get above a certain percentage, you're guaranteed to get an A, right? If you get above an 80, you're at an A, right? So it's a little bit different in that sense. And I would say the first year is obviously the hardest because it's very competitive. It's a very cutthroat environment at that point. Everyone is competing against each other. So, people are not, I would say you have your kind of group of people that you hang out with, but people are not like sharing ideas and, kind of trying to, they're not prepping for exams together or not because it's kind of like, hey, you're my like competitive. You're like my competition at this point, right? I want to get a base street job. You want to get a base street job. I can't like give you anything, right? So it's kind of that mindset. And then I think after the recruit, which happens, I think the beginning of your second year, it kind of tones down. People get out of that like competitive nature because the grades are already done, the interviews have already happened, the people that are going to be on Bay Street already got the jobs. So at that point, people kind of, I think they tone it down. It's not very competitive, becomes more friendly. People start doing extracurriculars, and then the environment kind of completely changes, right? The thing for me was I actually was only like in person for law school for my first year, and then COVID hit, and then for the next 2 years, I just did everything online. So I didn't really have the opportunity to do those like extracurriculars because I do know a lot of people that have said that like second and third year was like the best years of their life because they got to do so many things outside of law school, meet new people, etc. I didn't really have that opportunity because my second and third year was COVID, and then I only came back for my last semester of my last year of law school. And at that point, like everything was done. Like no one was really, wanting to do extracurricular. Everyone was just trying to get out and like get on with their lives at that point.
Yeah, no, I could not have said this better myself. Yeah, I think basically, yeah, I think the biggest we'll get into a lot of the stuff like you mentioned later, which I 100% agree with. But yeah, I think you want to get first year and you want to get good grades. It is the hardest year for sure. I think especially because you have no idea what's and there's a ton of other things that make law school hard. But basically, yeah, your grades are like your means of getting that job or getting job experience, and job experience is what you want. Extracurriculars can maybe help as well. Because grades are not like technically to be end all, but they're close. So you really do want to try doing as well as possible. Luckily, I guess if you don't like it depends on specialty. I do think outside corp or like the more like if you're in a really competitive or if you want to go like the big law or something very competitive, you'll need very high grades. But there are other less competitive specialties I think that don't need as high grades, but you there's nothing you still want to do as well as possible. Don't get me wrong. You really always want to do as well as you can. Yeah, I think first year's the most difficult year possible. I think there's also the 1L recruit you want, which is basically the you mentioned the summer jobs, Gagan. Do you want to like I think you want to talk about the kind of like the 1L recruit a little bit?
Yeah, so the 1L recruit happens right after I think first semester. So the only thing that they're looking at are your like midterm grades. And that is super competitive. Like I don't even think I applied to it to be honest with you, because like around me, people have told me like, hey, there's no unless you have like straight A's, there's no point because you're a very, very fresh law student. And the percentage of people that work on Bay Street, their first year summer is like probably like 0.5%. They only choose like maybe one or two people, and you got to be maybe at the top of your class, right? So I personally did not even do the 1L recruit because I did not have the highest grades. I didn't have all A's like some people had. And then for myself, the 2L recruit, what actually happened is COVID hit. So usually the recruit happens in like September, October, but mine was pushed to January of my 2L year, right? So what happened is I was applying to other places, and I got a position at a mid-sized firm in like Mississauga, and it was a great firm. It had like 50, 60 lawyers. I already accepted the job offer, and they were basically like, hey, if you accept this, you can't really do the recruit, right? Because you already have a job lined up. So I prepared my application, did everything. and I did not go through with the 2L recruit because the timeline had changed, right? So usually what happens is the 2L recruit happens September, October, and if you don't get a job then, there's other firms that are hiring throughout from October to December, let's say, right? What happened my year is basically the recruit got moved from September, October to January, but those firms that were supposed to hire after the recruit, they kept the same time frame, right? So there's people that are actively applying, and I was fortunate enough to already land a job. So I had my application prepared for the 12 recruit, but I didn't really go through it like other people would.
Yeah, that's fair. So it's like super important, I think. And it's like you really want to get as much job experience as possible, especially with stuff about the job market Egan already talked. I think
Yeah, just one thing
you
just to add on. So the thing that makes it really important is if you're able to land like a 2L summer job, you get lined up for articling position. Then if you get an articling position, you have your job lined up, right? So it's kind of a segue into getting a full-time job, right? And having the full experience. So once you're in, you're kind of in, right? Like you don't really have to worry about getting a job. So that's the way it makes it so important that you participate and try to land a job at this point.
exactly. Um, yeah, I think the gist is that first year is the most difficult because you have no idea what's going on. But second year it does get easier. Yeah, I think I think a lot of my personal advice for law school is honestly mostly going to echo what Kagan said. Uh, First year is the most important difficult year because you have no idea what's going on. It's probably best to assume that it's going to be as hard as possible and study as much as you can early because it's easier to do better. If like it's better to find to like over prepare and have to tone down your studying second semester or then you like tone down your studying second semester versus finding out you didn't study enough and getting worse grades because then it's a lot harder to recover. I think similarly, what Gagan mentioned about it being cutthroat in law school first year. This absolutely mirrored my personal experience. I think this is kind of universal. I think it's good to expect this because I didn't, and it caught me off guard. And I think uh, what I think might have helped my transition to law school a lot more personally is just knowing it, going and expecting this. Just because I talked with other law students. Eventually, like when I talked with other law students in upper years, and I found out like I wasn't alone. This is pretty universal. But I think in first year, I felt that was very difficult, and it made it like and it made the mental transition, I think, very difficult, which kind of is, I think, uh, as per the last report, the last piece of advice, or like try to maintain your sanity in any ways or in any ways you can, because the law school is very difficult and it will probably drive you crazy. There's just a it's a studying is it's a lot of time. The environment can be very brutal. Just make sure you have a life outside of law school. Do something that can let you like kind of make sure you're looking after yourself because it is incredibly difficult. Other than that, yeah, study as much as you can. First, get as much job experience as possible. Yeah, and then this is the articling positions, but I think Gagan's already covered this pretty well. Now I think we'll talk more. Well, actually, wait. Well, I think we'll talk about the wait. Oh, articling position. Right. Actually, right. No, sorry, I misread this. Gagan, you we talked more about getting an articling position, but do you want to share your experience actually articling for us before we talk about the bar, which is the last part before you become a lawyer?
Yeah, so my experience with articling, I didn't really have much legal experience going into it. So I'd summered at a firm as in my second year, and then I was kind of just recalled to that firm to article with them as well. So as an articling student, you're doing a lot of, I would say, admin tasks, research, and you're kind of just figuring out what type of law you want, right? So it depends on what firm you're at. So I was lucky enough that the firm that I was at, it was a full service firm. So I was able to do, corporate litigation, real estate planning, kind of everything and kind of get my feet wet in that. And then I know there's other articling positions that are kind of, it's just one type of law you're practicing. So there's positions with the Crown Counsel, right? We're just doing criminal law. That's the only type of law you're practicing. And then there's the bigger firms as well where you kind of get to experience a whole host of practice areas and kind of see which one you like, which one you don't like, and then kind of go from there. But I would say a lot of the kind of articling experiences, you're not being a lawyer per se, you're doing a lot of like research, admin tasks, shadowing, and kind of doing the minor tasks that the big lawyers don't want to do. I would say so. Like I'll give you an example. So a lot of litigation involves going to court, going to trial, things of that nature, right? There's another part of kind of litigation that's called small claims court, which only deals with matters below 35,000, right? So it's very low hanging fruit. A lot of the lawyers, the litigation lawyers, don't even do it. But you'll every so often you have a file come in and it'll be like a good client, and the lawyer will be like, oh, all right, I'll take it, right? So as an articling student, because it's such a low kind of hanging fruit at that point, a lot of articling students are the ones that run these small claims court files, and I had the ability to do one as well, right? So I was able to go before a judge, right, and kind of argue my case, right. But it's very low hanging fruit. It's like a couple $1,000s, so people are not too concerned about like who's representing them. But yeah, like I would say that articling is more so about kind of figuring out what type of law you want to do, where you want to practice, and then just being like I would say like a helper to the lawyers and in their practice, doing things like research, admin tasks, etc. So I would say that's how my experience was.
No, that makes sense. Uh, I think it like it's similar to like I think residency. It's like I think for doctors, I think and it sounds pretty comparable to that, which is where you basically just shadow doctors. You're like a mini doctor after you graduate medical school. And then finally, and probably the I guess not the least important, but or maybe this I think the bar does sound impressive. But it is the Ontario bar exam. I found out like this allegedly actually has a very high pass rate, which is, apparently it's upwards of 90%. Although the LSO does not actually officially publish any pass and fail statistics. So keep this in mind. Take this with a grain of salt. Roughly, you need to. This is basically after you article, or technically you study for this while you're articling. You need to pass these to actually practice as a full-fledged lawyer. Um, they both or there's two of them, the solicitor and the barrister exam. Uh, and they both test roughly your well the ethical and professional responsibilities, knowledge of the law, maintaining client relationships, problem issue identification, analysis, assessment. Actually, I'm not going to read the rest. I'm going to ask Gagan your experience because I thought this is probably the most. I think this is probably the most helpful thing I think you can get.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing so the 90% pass rate, right? So I think one caveat to that is that's usually for people that go to law school in Canada. So one of the like the major law schools that you kind of mentioned. And I think you also pointed out that like the success rate or acceptance rates of those schools is less than 10%, right? So I think it makes sense why the pass rate is already so high because you already funnel out most of the students. So you're getting like the cream of the crop in the sense that only 10% of all applicants are the ones going to law school, which makes the bar exam pass rate a little bit higher than it usually is. So I do know that if you include like so there's obviously students that are not go to law school in Canada, then the pass rate is not as high as that 90%, but it is high 90% if you're go to law school in Canada and you're educated here and things of that nature. Yeah, so for the in terms of the actual exam, yeah, as you mentioned, there's two. There's the solicitor and the barrister exam. Solicitor has to do more so with like corporate real estate. The barrister is more so litigation based. But I think throughout the whole test, I think what they're just trying to test is like it's a lot of like ethical responsibility questions. So questions will be framed as being a corporate question or litigation question. But in reality, they're asking you what to do, what not to do as a lawyer, right? What's your professional responsibilities? Another thing to kind of point out is these both of these tests are open book. So you'll have like something called like an indices that kind of tells you all the topics that are covered. So the way that you kind of process this test is you read the question and then your mind say, hey, this is a litigation question based on a class action lawsuit, for example. So you go to your indices, go to litigation, go to class action lawsuit, and then when you go to that page, you'll have what you would have done before in the study materials is you would have highlighted the most important parts, right? So you would go to that page, try to look for the most important parts and try to find the answer and then go from there. So this test is it's more so about, I would say, time management and looking up things than actually having knowledge of stuff. So I know people that, they barely study for this test because they were saying like, oh, it's just looking up answers at the end of the day. I know some people that put in a lot of work to study for this test, so it just really depends on how comfortable you are with the material. Usually, you just kind of read through the material, have your indices by you, and then kind of prepare for the test. It's open book as I mentioned, so you don't have to really memorize anything. It's more so looking up answers to your questions. And as I mentioned, a lot of like professional responsibility where questions are framed as being corporate question or litigation, but they're really trying to see if you understand what your like ethical responsibilities are as a lawyer.
That's actually that's really helpful. I also want to Kagan, were most of your tests when you went to law school open book?
Yeah, they were open book as well. So I would say it's similar in that sense to a law school exam because they are open book as well.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. All like almost I think every test I've taken in law school has been open book, and a lot of it kind of mirrors what you the same experience you've had writing the bar, where a lot of it is just a lot of your prep is knowing where you need to go in the test and making sure you save as much time as possible.